and welcome to yet another episode of Conversations with Aviators Buzz. I'm Aditya Anand, and joining me today is Jitendra Bhargava, former Executive Director, Air India, and author of Descent of Air India. That's a book that requires no introduction, actually. And Mr. Bhargava joins me today to talk on COVID and aviation and how things look for the future. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining me. Uh, so let's get to it. The aviation sector was badly mauled by COVID, right? And the future brightened up now with the vaccine coming in. So,
let's get to the history of it. Airlines did act as super spreaders of coronavirus because when the infection or the virus spread in Wuhan and Chinese government wasn't forthcoming with the information or alerting the rest of the countries, airlines were continuing to operate flights to and from China, including Wuhan. So they were carrying passengers from Wuhan to various parts of the world who were mingling with the other colleagues of theirs, the family members, and traveling to other places. So in a way, airlines facilitated the spread of coronavirus to a large chunk of people. And the government, tasked with the responsibility of containing the spread of virus, naturally took action like suspension of flights first between Wuhan and their countries, and then suspending flights totally as the virus is spread to a large number of people in large number of countries. So which meant flights were grounded, planes were not flying, cabin crew, pilots, other airline staff, etc. were rendered jobless. So this struck a huge blow on the airline finances. Airlines have committed expenditure like lease rentals, payment to staff, etc., etc. Now, many airlines in the world resorted to parking their aircraft in the American desert in California because they knew they will not be able to use the aircraft for next 18, 20 months. Some airlines projected that it could take up to 3 years for recovery. So what we are today witnessing is that almost all airlines have subjected to pay cuts, retrenchment of staff, grounding of aircraft, curtailing of network, etc. With the result, they are in a bad state. Governments in various countries have gone to some to the extent of helping their national carriers and some haven't. America, for example, doled out a lot of money, billions of dollars, so that the staff of the airlines were not retrenched or rendered jobless. German government bought 20% stake in Lufthansa. British government extended aid to British Airways. So there were various governments helping so that the airline could survive. Some airlines were not that fortunate, and at least 8 to 10 airlines collapsed because of the coronavirus impact on the traveling public. So it's been a sad story. But the redeeming part now is, like for example, the Indian government commenced domestic operations from 25th of May, were innovative enough to launch Vande Bharat flights so that Indian nationals who were stranded in various parts of the world because of the sudden imposition of lockdown and grounding of the airline operations. So they started bringing people back into India. Now let's look at one part here, because there was a lot of criticism by the traveling public that why has the government imposed a total lockdown and grounded the flights, etc. We were stranded, we were not given notice, etc. To them, I only would like to make a statement which they must appreciate and understand, that the governments are tasked with the responsibility of containing the spread of coronavirus.
yes,
And they are responsible for it. So they need to take action what is in the best interest of the public at large. No doubt that people got stranded. But can they imagine the kind of catastrophic reaction they would have had if these passengers were allowed to travel into India and then they would have gone to the families, etc. And it would have only added to the kind of numbers that we were witnessing and which were on the ascent at that time. The third part, of course, were the airlines who were also unhappy that why have the flights been grounded, etc. But they all got to look at simple perspective. The government was tasked with the responsibility of containing the spread.
Yeah.
So this, unfortunately, message has not gone clearly amongst the traveling public. When the government of India suspended flights to and from UK after a new variant of the virus had been discovered in England, the reaction was quite the same. They wanted to come to India, get back on the flight, as if they are not having any kind of a social responsibility towards their family, towards their neighbors, towards the other public, etc. So it's been an unfortunate part. An unfortunate thing is that government, while taking action, which was the right action in my opinion, has not reacted the way it should to educate the people. Media, unfortunately, has also added in making people heroes out of the tweets that they have tweeted about their unpleasant experience at the airports, etc. Take the recent instance when the flights to UK were suspended. People came to India because there were 24-hour notice given, etc. And the rules were laid down that they will come not only with a test certificate at their end, but also undergo a test on arrival in India. And only if they are found negative will they go on, but still be quarantined, both institutional and home quarantine. But they were not willing to accept it. They echoed their feelings or expressed their disgust on Twitter, and media made heroes out of them and said, this is what is it. When the reality was that Air India, which operated the first flight when the flights were resumed, not only announced before the departure of the flight, and 20 passengers who were booked to travel on the flight did not travel because they did not want to get institutional quarantine for 14 days. And they made announcements on board the aircraft. But yet, passengers at Delhi airport had criticism for the flights. So what we need is that airlines have shown in month of February and March that they contributed to the spread of coronavirus by carrying passengers. Should that mistake be repeated after we know the kind of impact, the damaging effect it has when people travel from point A to point B, mingle and do not really observe social distancing, wearing masks, etc., etc.
Yeah, but I mean, would you really blame the airlines for, you know, there's a huge difference between the time in March to now, right? I mean, we are in a way better prepared, wouldn't you say?
No, I think you've misunderstood. I did not blame the airlines. I blame some of the air travelers.
The travelers,
Air
right?
travelers had to take note of the fact that flights have been suspended by the government of India or by governments of other countries so that people do not travel from point A to point B and carry with them the virus. And this cannot be given, they can't be given notice, oh, we will suspend flights 72 hours from now. There will be a mad scramble for people to travel. You can't put the system in place to ensure medical checks on arrival, medical tests being undertaken, they're being subject to test and arrangements for quarantine, etc. So airlines have played their part. Let me explain to you. You cannot blame. They have taken a kind of blow on their survival. Let me explain to you. The kind of losses that they have suffered. The governments in countries where the governments have helped, well, it has been a help to them. But countries in which the governments have not extended any help, like Indian government, for example, the airlines have really suffered financially. The only redeeming part of Indian aviation is that our domestic operations commenced 2 months after the suspension of flights. International flights were introduced under the Vande Bharat mission. And thanks to the large Indian diaspora that we have all over the world, there were a lot of passengers to be brought back. So airlines have suffered, but airlines in India have got indirect help through resumption of operations at an early date, because in several countries, airlines have not been able to scale up the operation to the extent India has.
Right. But now that, with the vaccine production having begun, do you see the future to have brightened up?
You see, the aviation industry was on its path of recovery. If you see up to October, every successive month you had more number of flights, more number of passengers traveling. But once the new variant of the virus was discovered in UK and 3 other countries, the governments again resorted to suspension of flights. Governments introduced the quarantine rule again, so which was a setback for the aviation industry. While the number of passengers and the number of flights was on the rise, and fortunately the vaccine came in at the right time. The IATA has reacted positively to it, that look, and Etihad is the first one. The travel pass that has been introduced by IATA and Etihad Airlines and Emirates Airlines are the first ones to take advantage, is that passengers need not go through the drill every time they travel. Once you have had a vaccine, you're subjected to a test, you have tested negative, there is no need for doing it at every time. So which is a very healthy step, a step in the healthy, good direction, and for to hasten the speed of recovery of the airlines. Likewise, IATA is asking the European governments for introduction of an EU certificate. So if a person has been subjected or taken a vaccine, been through a test, tested negative, he can freely travel in the European region. So these are measures which will go a long way if all governments pay heed and said, look, IATA as a representative body of airlines, concerned with the economics of airlines, wanting speedy recovery of the airlines, is suggesting measures which the governments must accept. You see, Indian government had been proactive in a way. When the domestic flights were resumed, Vande Bharat flights were resumed, because Indian diaspora is spread all over the world, they had to be brought back. So Indian carriers haven't been impacted to the extent many other carriers in the world have. I'm not saying by any stretch of imagination that they've not been impacted. The employees have been impacted because of salary cuts, lower level of flying, etc., on which is based their total remuneration income, But we are seeing positive signs of recovery. If you remember, in the initial stages, March, April, several carriers were saying that it could take up to 3-4 years for them to attain pre-COVID level of passengers.
Yeah.
The vaccine measures being taken, my take now is that perhaps by 2022, we should be able to see normalcy to a large extent. But we cannot also forget one simple principle, because the demand destruction that took place, there are still elements which are prohibiting people from traveling. I've often stated that there is always a trigger for a person to travel on a flight. You have to go for business meetings, you have to go for conferences, symposium, family meetings, weddings, and you take any number of measures for which you travel.
Yeah.
Now, as long as you have restrictions on the trigger, that there is not going to be a trigger for people to travel. For example, in India, business meetings to a very large extent have been substituted by video conferencing.
Yes.
The bureaucrats in Delhi or FICCI, CII, etc., are not holding meetings. What they're doing is holding meetings through video conferencing.
Yeah.
The weddings have resumed, but on restricted number of guests.
Right.
Symposiums, seminars, conferences are no longer taking place. The sporting events, for example, IPL, was not held in India, which would have meant a lot of travel within the country, was held in Dubai.
Right.
So much so that on social front, people are not visiting friends and relatives because everybody is little apprehensive that should I get a guest of mine or a relative of mine from one city to another and not being sure of their status, are they infected or are they not infected? So as long as this trigger is not restored, that yes, I want to travel, and then of course is the biggest factor. If you recall when the government announced resumption of domestic flights, they also discouraged people above 65 years from traveling.
Yes.
Right? Now imagine the number of people who are above 65 who travel, but they are not traveling. Of course, some of them are, but many are still desisting from the temptation to travel. And the trigger, as I said, holidays. The younger people, many of them who are working from home or were either laid off or subjected to salary cuts, this is no opportune time for them to go on a vacation.
Yeah.
Plus, they are not very sure that this tourist destination will be free of COVID at the moment. So vaccine is undoubtedly going to be a huge turning point as far as the aviation industry is concerned. But then this is just the beginning. At the moment for in India, only the frontline medical fraternity, those people are being given vaccine. So by the time the general public get into and are subjected to vaccine, etc., it could perhaps be the end of 2021 or early 2022. So we should not be over optimistic that airline industry will recover soon. We'll get back to the pre-COVID level number of passengers. Let's wait, but let's draw the satisfaction from the fact that we are far, far better than what we were 6 months ago. So we must look at the silver lining in these dark clouds.
Just today we hear that, at least one Indian airport operator and one airline have written to the government, pushing for the government to prioritize vaccination of their employees, and they are willing to even foot that tab. So if that happens, how do you see it? Kind of giving a boost to the.
There are two aspects to it. One, the government of India, for example, announced that in phase 1 they will cover the medical fraternity, fire brigade people, and all those sections of society who need vaccine on urgency. In the second phase, also they announced that you'll have paramilitary people and other things. So it's very good if an airline has written to the government, because airline staff, pilots, cabin crew, airport staff, etc., also need to be taken up on priority or given the necessary priority for vaccination. Now, only if they are secure on a flight can they keep operating, and the fear in them also must go.
Yeah.
And the second part, of course, which is happening with certain airlines, that the airlines are vaccinating the passengers or giving them the test.
Yes.
So a passenger does not have to incur an expenditure for getting a test done. The test is done on departure and on arrival, so that they are not quarantined, etc. These are all elements that would help a passenger, A, remove the fear of travel, B, prompt people to travel and say, look, I can travel and I must travel now. Because after 10 months of the lockdown imposition, people have also become restless.
Yeah.
They also want to travel. So with the government doing its bit, airlines coming forth, ITA suggesting the measures like a travel pass and a certificate for certain region, European Union example,
yeah.
I'm sure things will get normalized, but then come what may, to expect that normalcy will come in the next quarter or 2 quarters from now, I don't think would be a realistic thinking.
Uh, Taking off from a point you made a little earlier, uh, while yes, there is definitely apprehension of travel, but over the period of the new year, for example, we saw a lot of people travel to destinations like Goa, for instance, and this is despite for at least Maharashtra, for example, having a requirement for one to undertake a test before you land in Mumbai. But that did not seem to have deterred.
No, I don't think you can draw any conclusion from what happened at Diwali time, the load factors, or at the time of the New Year. They constitute a minuscule number of passengers. And let's not forget two vital facts. At this stage, airlines are allowed to deploy only 80% of their capacity. And we do not have their entire network. For example, Mumbai Jodhpur flight is non existent at the moment. Right? So there are several sectors on which flights have not been introduced. The second aspect that one needs to look into this aspect is that airlines are operating their flights at 60-65% load factor. And the biggest proof has come out in the public now that in spite of the fact that only 80% of the normal schedule being allowed by the government to the airlines, many of the airlines have now announced sales offering ridiculously lucrative fares for travel. Why would they do it? To only entice people to come and travel so that the seats can be filled. But you're trying to fill seats at a cost which is much below the cost of producing a seat. And if airlines believe, well, 5%, 10%, even 20% people may get attracted because of the lucrative fare being offered. But low fares cannot overcome the fear element in the traveling public. That look, because a fare of 1,000 rupees, 1,200 rupees being offered, I will travel. No, a person is going to put his health first, his fear of coronavirus first, and then take the flight. So it's my opinion, airlines, well, this is a mode that they're trying to fill up the seats and they probably clock higher load factors, but I don't think they'll be very, very successful in it because a person who is supposed to travel anyway will make use of the lower fares, but to say the size of the traveling cake, public cake will go up, I don't think is a realistic evaluation by the airlines. But considering the fact that almost all domestic airlines have introduced sales tickets, attractive fares in the market now, let's see what happens when we get the data for the month of January. We'll see how many people really availed of the low fares. But Goa example or any other festive example is a very small number, and that I will not take it as a sign of great recovery in the Indian aviation or global aviation.
Right, but Mr. Bhargava, fares the fares are one part, the sale, but there's also, for example, Indigos announced seven new cities where it will be going, including Leh and Gaya and a few others. So what do you make of that strategy?
You know, it's not only Indigo, even SpiceJet for that matter has introduced flights to new destinations. Considering the fact that there is a restriction, 80%, you are not able to launch multiple flights between two destinations because you will not be able to fill them up. So you are being innovative and saying, okay, if I can't get enough traffic for 6 flights between Mumbai and Bangalore or Mumbai and Delhi, let me launch a flight to another destination. And if I get 40-50% people traffic on that site, which is an unharnessed traffic, I would say you haven't really exploited that route. So they are going to do it. It's good thinking on the part. But they could have perhaps articulated to the government let's keep these new destination flights over and above the 80%. If they can really justify or gainfully deploy 80% of their operations, commence them with economic consideration, getting enough passengers, enough revenue on those flights. Because this is the last thing that one would expect from the airlines would be that at this critical time, if they were to add to the losses only because they want to enhance their market share, get more people to travel on them. I have very often said that even in the best of times, when they were recording 85-90% load factor, the unfortunate part was that many airlines were chasing passengers at the cost of profitability, and they did not have enough reserves when the fuel prices went up suddenly or the passengers dropped. Building cash reserves is very, very vital for an airline.
That quite explains why we see airlines making these going to newer cities and making these changes. So that I think brings us to our final question. When can we see normalcy return to the aviation sector? I know you touched upon it, but I'll just ask you again.
Look, there are various estimates depending how pessimistic or optimistic a person is. There are some airlines, global airlines, who have clearly stated that we will not have normalcy till 2023, which means 2 more years to go.
Right.
Then there are airlines, or take for example the Indian Civil Aviation Minister, who said it about 5 months ago that by Diwali time we'll have normalcy in operation, then New Year time, and then in the next 3-4 months, but we are nowhere close to normalcy. As I said earlier, there has to be a trigger for people to travel. And unless normalcy is restored, conferences, business meetings, seminars, sporting events, medical, people can travel from one point to another point for medical surgeries, like people used to come to Mumbai and Chennai very often, those kind of things. So unless weddings take place, guest room limits are removed, colleges start function, people will travel, the fear is not there, and people say, look, I'm going to be visiting my son or daughter and spend a month with them, or son and daughter visiting the parents. Now, unless these kind of things get restored, to expect that the airlines will get back to normalcy without these elements being in place, I don't think it's happened. And let's not also forget one thing. At the moment, international tourists are not allowed to come.
Yeah.
Under the Vande Bharat operation, only Indian nationals and people who've got diplomatic work can travel. Now, every time a foreigner comes to India, he travels on domestic sectors. He will go to Goa, he'll go to Chennai, he'll go to Delhi, he'll go to Mumbai and all those kind of places. Now, once you do not have this international traffic also coming to India, take out those domestic travel apps also. And the figures being given out by the government when they say that we have attained 57% normalcy, DGCA data, that we are 43% down as compared to year-on-year analysis. You know, we are forgetting one simple aspect in this. That this figure of 57 includes people who, because in the absence of flights, international flights from various cities that we used to have, right, say Nagpur to Gulf or Nagpur to other places, they are now coming to Mumbai. So one domestic flight taken and then going to another sector. So, and likewise on the return journey, when a person wants to go to Nagpur or coming back from United States, he's coming here and then here rather than fly directly from there to, say, for example, Qatar Airways used to operate flights to Nagpur and to their country and then on to United States. So, you know, there are multiple factors. But let's be positive. Let's keep being innovative to bring in the changes. The faster the government reacts, the better it is. But to expect normalcy to return, I don't think it's feasible. And it's kind of, I would say, one would be only misleading himself if one was to say that we are at the threshold of restoring normalcy or seeing normalcy in Indian aviation. It's not going to happen that easily.
Hmm.
But the measures taken so far are good, promising. But as I said, ultimately, normalcy in other spheres, and so that the trigger for travel is revived.
Yeah.
Don't expect normalcy of the pre-COVID levels.
Right. So trigger for travel it is. Yeah. So thank you, Mr. Bhargava. Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you.
on Aviators Buzz. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.